staff, faculty, all of you for being here today. My name is Katie Rollauer, and it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Olin Alumni Entrepreneurs Committee, consisting of alumni trustees Maya Bittner and Lee Edwards and alum Anusha Datar. We are very excited to convene this group of alumni founders, developing technologies focused on creating a sustainable future. Thank you to the panelists for traveling from Washington State, Florida, Alabama, and the greater Boston area to celebrate with us today. I would also like to thank, and introduce our moderator and faculty member, Lawrence Neely, who will guide us through this event. Before we hear from our panelists, I'd like to invite Olin President Gilda Barabino to the podium. Welcome, Gilda.
Thank you, Katie. Well, hello, and welcome to everyone joining us today here in person in the Nordham Auditorium, as well as those who are joining us via live stream. I'd like to thank our alumni, Maya Bittner, Lee Edwards, and Anusha Datar, for co-hosting today's panel and for everything you do for the college. And thank you so much to Professor Neely for being our moderator and for all you do for the college. I also would like to welcome and thank our alumni panelists, who you will meet in just a moment. Thank you so much for coming back to our campus today and for sharing your journeys in entrepreneurship and in the sustainability space. Earlier in my inaugural remarks, I mentioned that inauguration marks a new beginning, but it's also a celebration of tradition. For 16 years, soon to be 17, Olin has graduated class after class of talented, passionate, caring, and driven alumni. To be an Olin alum is to be a member of a group of people who see in each other a strong desire to help others and to help their communities and the world around them. It is no surprise to me that our alumni panelists are all pursuing ways to engineer a more sustainable future. I said earlier this morning that we believe the world urgently needs engineering education to be welcoming to and enable the success of people from all backgrounds, that everyone deserves the opportunity to achieve their potential, and that the problems we face will require collaboration across disciplines. It's so very clear that you are already doing this, the work of engineering for everyone. For that, we thank you, and it is my esteemed pleasure to turn it over to Lawrence Neely.
Thank you, freshly inaugurated President Gilda Barabino. I am so inclined to ask everyone in the back to close your laptops and come all the way to the front, but I'm going to let it be. We have an excuse, right? I will say that those of you who may have come in a bit late and really want to come a bit closer, feel free to do so. I'm going to invite our panelists to come and grab a seat right now, so in that transition, if you're so inclined to populate some of these spaces in your back there, Allison Goodrow, go ahead and come on up front. Thank you, Jason. So we have about 60 minutes together today, and hopefully you'll hear very little from me, but a ton from our panelists. They are a wonderful collection of Olin alums who are doing really interesting things. And kind of in the spirit of today in storytelling, we've asked each of them to kick us off by telling a bit of their origin story. You'll note that we didn't ask them to share necessarily origin stories of their companies, but their origin stories, right? And I think that's very consistent and true to how we think about things here at Olin and what's gotten them to where they are right now in their entrepreneurial and sort of their life journeys. I think maybe also consistent with sort of the circumstance, the pomp and circumstance of today. We will start with the senior member of the bunch, right?
The old guy?
The old guy. The old guy. And work our way through. So I have the pleasure of asking Jeff Satwitz to kick us off, class of '06, and take it away.
Hi, everybody. So Jeff Satwitz, class of '06, and part of the partner class at Olin College as well. And I think that's where kind of my origin story really does begin on the entrepreneurial side of things. I joined a college that was a mud pile at the time that we were doing college tours and admissions, and I'm sure everyone here went on tours of lots of other colleges, and they're beautiful places. Buildings with ivy and whatever else you want to look at, and the belief that this would become the place that it's become, I think, is a really big part of my origin story as an entrepreneur. It gave me the belief that, you know, if you think you want to achieve something, that you can do it. You know, so started here, worked with a number of faculty that are still in seats here, which is awesome, for a year, trying to figure out what a curriculum at a college should be, and then, you know, joined the freshman class and started taking the curriculum that we designed. We should have made it a lot easier. That would have been nice, but it was a wonderful curriculum, and, you know, it's evolved a lot since then, which is great to see. But I think through that whole process of seeing something go from nothing to a school gave me the delusion that starting a company would also be possible, and you know, the confidence to do that. And so started a company called, well, at the time it was Seahorse Powered, but it became Big Belly during the end of my freshman year, and then worked on that all through college, and I've been doing that ever since. So that's kind of my origin story in a nutshell, and it really started with this place and what this started out as, and it's really great to see what it's blossomed into and how it continues to evolve and meet the challenges of the future. And I think entrepreneurship doesn't stop when something starts. It has to continue all the way through.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. And I mean, I think your technology of all the ones represented up here is the one that we're certain that everybody in here has probably actually interacted with today, right?
Even if you didn't know you did, probably.
Does that, raise your hand if you did in fact interact with Jeff's technology today.
Awesome.
Yeah, not today.
Yeah.
And everyone else probably actually did, right? So
By the end of this, there'll be more hands up, I'm guessing.
if you've disposed of or recycled anything in the bins, we have at least the bins outside of it, in front of the dining hall, you've touched a product of Jeff and Big Belly. Awesome. So let's see. I told them I would pick as I go along. And I'll also say to everyone that we expect that we'll do this sort of introductory piece, and then there will be ample time for you all to ask questions. And so make sure you're taking notes and capturing those, because we will be throwing a microphone at you in order to hear from you a bit later on. Erica, would you like to share with us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I guess my origin story, Olin definitely has its fingerprints all over that. I came to Olin, I actually wasn't that sure about engineering. I knew I would like designing things, but I wasn't sure it was what I really wanted to do, but I was convinced by Olin that it made sense to work in technology just because of the big impact that technology has on the world, and I wanted to be able to have a say in that. And I think, so I came to Olin kind of looking for purpose, and that naturally kind of funneled me into the sustainability space. I took Ben Linder's sustainability class back in 2008, 2009. I was in it with James, actually. We worked on some projects together, and we're in Ben's Sustainable Design Lab. Ben terrified me about the state of the environment, and it kind of set me on an obsessive path thinking about energy and sustainability and what I could do to have an impact there. Graduated college, and the job that I got offered that seemed to make the most sense, I actually took a job at a defense contractor working as a systems engineer. Didn't know where that was going to lead, but it gave me a lot of leadership opportunities, and they ended up kind of seeing my passion for sustainability, and I got funneled into a lot of projects that were developing energy, water, waste technologies for small base camps that were being set up out of nowhere, usually on really the early stage, kind of doing what a lot of owners do, thinking about the whole system, including interacting with the customers and kind of taking things from idea through prototype phase there. So I got a lot of leadership experience there, grew my confidence in my ability to invent things, and then was thinking about, still had these impact questions though. What was the technology I was developing really going to go be used for? What was the best way to make an impact? And so I wanted to explore that some more. So I went back to Olin and said, hey, can you help me apply for a Fulbright? I had a researcher that I wanted to work with in the Netherlands and ended up getting a Fulbright to do my master's in the Netherlands studying society, science, and technology. So how does technology affect society? How does society determine what technologies get accepted? Basically a year of philosophy and trying to think about that in terms of sustainability. Ended up with more questions than answers, but at the time I got really passionate about local energy generation and how when energy was generated closer to its source, people tended to think about the big picture of their energy use overall. I was doing some wind energy consulting at the time and was staring at buildings at a festival one day, and the thought popped into my head of, I wondered, does wind actually increase at the edges of buildings? And then that seed of an idea was the genesis of the company that I started now, Accelerate Wind. Started it 4 years ago, and we're taking advantage of the fact that wind does increase at the edges of buildings in order to capture it right at the edge of the roof and produce wind power at a cost that is equal to solar power. So it's designed to be installed alongside solar so that solar and wind can be installed along the same commercial building and help buildings get closer to net zero. So we've been in the R&D phases for a while, and now we're moving towards getting a bunch of pilots out in the world. We've worked with a ton of Oliners over the course of building this, and so I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you so much. And we will now jump to the Olin connection you called out in the midst of your story. James, would you love to share with us?
Oh. I'm going to turn on my mic so there's a chance that you'll hear me. Is it on?
Is it on? No.
Really quiet.
It is on. Well,
Here.
did you just give him the mic?
Oh,
That's or something.
No. Okay. We'll do this. Awesome. So we're starting all with our stories, right? So mine doesn't actually start with Olin. For me, when I was 10, my parents moved me onto a sailboat and took us sailing around the world for a whole host of really crazy reasons. But the result of that was twofold. One was I grew up in other cultures, grew up in spaces that weren't the US. And that meant that I never felt quite like just a US citizen. I never felt that there was as many boundaries as we set up, that we really could limit ourselves to our own space and that wasn't affected by everyone else. But I also grew up on a fairly closed system, one where you had to store the water you used and you knew exactly where your waste went and you knew when you turned on that light that you were draining your battery and that power would have to be produced some way. That has a very visceral impact on the limitations of the amount of resources we have. It also puts you in the face of a lot of the sort of majesty of the natural world, that we can be quite small in the face of a storm and that it's nothing to scoff at. So the seeds of my desire, and I apologize, I'm a little jet lagged, so I'll ramble a little bit, but the seeds of my desire to think about and try to understand our place on this planet and how what we do could affect people for better or worse, and that other creatures on this planet for better or worse, started there. It also was where I started getting into engineering. Fixing the toilets on the boat or the engine when that broke was a necessary rite of passage. And so later, when I had the opportunity to come to Olin, I was like, oh, I can do hands-on stuff and solve problems, tinkering and fixing things and working on building technologies that engage with the natural world. I was obsessed. And I also went through that crucible set up by Ben Linder. I'm going to call you out, Ben, because we still talk about you at my company. So I'm like, this kind of design thinking, or this kind of way of phrasing a sustainability problem. Anyway. But those two elements, asking the question of what was our obligation to the rest of the world? What is our obligation, how we use our engineering skills? Because engineering skills don't exist in a vacuum. We don't just make technologies. Those technologies are influenced by our experience, and they influence other people's experiences. And when we focus that, when we use things like collaborative design in how we build a new system, we can step outside of just our own limited focus and create something that's really deeply meaningful to a lot of people. So those two things stuck with me, and I ended up working only in sustainability-related companies after that, but moving from hard tech to hard tech, from engines to sensors. And it was after we wrapped up my first startup, which was working on how to make shrimp farms more sustainable, that my co-founder and I asked the question of, given how little time we have left to solve the climate crisis, what is the most impactful thing we can do? What is the way that we can most likely solve this problem? And as an engineer, my intuition was always, we need to build a new technology. We need to make fusion happen. We need to change how energy gets from point A to point B. We need a new type of electric transportation. And it was really after I read Project Drawdown, call out to Erica, that a new paradigm sort of settled on us. It was, we have all the technologies we need. We have built all the things we need to do to solve the climate crisis. It is no longer an issue of building something new. It is now an issue of directing our collective action. How can we get all of these billions of people on the planet to move in a direction where we are imagining and creating a better future, a positive future, one in which we don't have millions of people die from the climate crisis? It's a knife's edge for sure, but it's one that I think is both worthy and interesting. And there are a few systems that we use when we think about solving collective problems. One is politics, but coming out of the sort of recent political environment, I didn't see that as a space that I could contribute in, that was highly functional, that would get us to a point where we stay below the amount of warming that we're looking at. And there's another one that's really powerful in the US, but also scares me. It's the one where I ended up, and that's financial systems. When you invest in something, you are making a statement about what kind of world the future is going to be. When you invest in a home, you get a loan. Everyone involved is saying that you are going to have more income to pay off that loan. You're going to, this house will have more value in the future. But similarly, when you invest in the technologies necessary to transition our economy away from fossil fuels, for example, you're saying that that future is the future we believe in and we're going to manifest it. So as a result of that circuitous path, I ended up in something that was not technical at all. I ended up creating an investment firm, which I guess I'll talk about later. But that's sort of my origin story and how it meandered towards Carbon Collective, which is the company that I have co-founded and am working on now.
Awesome, thank you. I guess we will continue to go in pseudo-chronological order. So we will hop over to Kevin.
Okay.
Class of 2012?
Class of 2012.
There we go.
James.
Awesome.
So, hello, everyone. A few of you here know me. My name is Kevin Simon, class of 2012. And the startup that I'll be talking about that I co-founded is KateWorks. It's a solar irrigation startup that designs, manufactures, and sells small, high-efficiency solar pumps for small plot farmers in East India and around the world in order to help them irrigate year-round. And I'm actually going to tell you the story of the role that I played in starting this company and how it came to be, because it's kind of a fun story. And I think it pulls in with a lot of themes that we saw today at the inauguration. So it started with the end of Olin for me. And as I was leaving Olin, I became very convinced that there's no such thing as a purely technical problem, and that everything at the end of the day was a systems problem. So I went to MIT to study systems engineering. And I was able to get a great fellowship from the Tata Trusts, focusing on trying to find a way to develop some sort of technological solution that could help India. The Tata Trust is largely focused on India. And over the course of that work, I took a course on sustainable design, design for development, and in that class did a project on solar pump design, solar pump system design. And over the course of that class, learned a lot of the core skills that I needed to do this work, but also formed a team with other students that were very passionate about seeing this technology through, continuing to explore the solar pump space, and trying to see if there was some way we could actually do this to have the impact that we wanted to have. And so that ended up sinking its way into my master's thesis as this core question of what's going to be the next technology where it's financially feasible to use solar power with this technology. Today, you could run a business in a rural village in India or in Africa using solar power to charge a cell phone and charge an LED light and providing that to people. You can run a profitable business doing that. And the question was, what's going to be next? And we thought that this might be solar pumping. So we went down this road, and the team had a really good chemistry, and we kept working on this, trying to answer this question. And then in the summer, the first summer of grad school for me, went to India to do a lot of field work, meet with NGOs, went and talked with farmers, learned about their needs, met with government organizations, and finally came to this guy, Anish Kumar, from the organization Pradhan, a super cool organization. You should look it up, and all of the alumni organizations that spun out of it. And I was talking to him about these ideas that I was working on, including the solar pump. And when I explained to him the pump that we were trying to make, the amount of water we were trying to move, the type of water sources we were trying to draw from, and the price we thought we could make it for, he said, "Kevin, if you can make this pump, I will take it and spread it across India like a wildfire. And it will affect so many people's lives." And I said, "Okay, great. Where do we go from here?" And we came up with a rough idea for what a pilot would look like for this. Went back to my teammates and collaborators at MIT, and we got to work trying to design and finalize the testing of this pump over 6 months in order to get it ready for a field pilot in East India, in the town Chaibasa outside of Chakradarpur in the state of Jharkhand. And so we worked pretty much nonstop outside of class trying to get this pump built. We were walking in through blizzards in order to get to the machine shop in order to fabricate these pumps and test them, loaded these pumps into suitcases, flew with them in the overhead cases to get there because they wouldn't let us check it, and then finally deployed the pumps. And that was when we realized, seeing the farmers using the pump, seeing that the farmers were giving feedback that they believed that they could actually use this to irrigate their fields, we decided that we wanted to turn this into a company. And so we applied to an accelerator at MIT. We recruited one other person from our class that we got along with very well, which is actually a wonderful shout out to Georgia Tech's BME program, where our CEO was Victor Lesniewski. When I told him about Gilda joining Olin, had nothing but glowing things to say. And he's actually now our CEO. So it's just really great to see all of this coming together in a wonderful way. And so the company has continued along. We've got a lot of sponsorship, set up manufacturing in India, and now we've deployed over 200 pumps across 14 states in India, helping farmers who used to water by hand now irrigate and get revenue for 3 seasons of the year, and we're scaling up manufacturing for the next run of 600 pumps.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. And now, Nikhil, bring it home.
Sure. Is the mic working, or if you got a green light, it should work. You can hear me? Yeah. Hey, so I'm Nikhil, go up to the class of 2013. It's really great to be back here. I'm getting a lot of sense of deja vu coming back. When I saw the email from this and Katie and Lawrence reaching out, I thought it was kind of interesting talking about the origin story. I've talked a lot about the origin story of the company in the past. And the company quickly is Determinant Materials, and we recycle electronics with a fully clean mechanical process. And we produce precious metals, which we sell to the jewelry industry to make a branded jewelry product. So I've talked a lot about the origin story of that in the past, but I haven't really talked about my origin story, so I'm actually kind of excited. But this also means that you probably have to bear with me. There's far less practice. So I guess the origin story is I really got into science and engineering and technology from a young age. I think I was 8 years old. I had a childhood friend. It was his birthday, and my mom bought him a science book for his birthday. And she made the mistake of leaving it out on the kitchen table or something, and I started reading through it, and I just got fascinated by it. I was reading all about different areas of science and energy, some of the things that we're all doing here on the stage. And it was quite fascinating to me, and I looked on the back cover and it said, the author is an engineer. I didn't know what an engineer was back then so much, but it was quite interesting. I told my mom, I said, hey, I really like this book. And she was like, oh, don't worry, Nikhil, I'll go get your friend another book. You go ahead and read this one. So that's how I first got into the space. If you fast forward a couple of years, a really big formative experience for me was summer after freshman year of high school. I went to India, let's say the first time alone. I went for 3 months there. This was like around, I think maybe 2005 or so. It's summer after freshman year of high school. And it was a really formative experience for me because I saw just how much energy insecurity and resource constraints they have there. The country has grown leaps and bounds since then. I'm sure you've seen it, of course, Kevin. Even back then, it's a developing country. People wanted to basically live like Americans. They wanted to have the resources and the energy consumption we have. So I'd be sitting in my cousin's shop in some of the areas in the capital, New Delhi, and the electricity would just go out. So you're in 110, 120 weather. It's burning hot. It's super humid. The fans, AC, and all that would go out. And I just remember thinking, why is there so much pollution here, and yet there's such energy insecurity? How is it that they're ever going to get to, the developed status that they want to achieve? The environment's getting destroyed, while at the same time they have these resource energy constraints. So that was really big for me, and that's kind of, if you fast forward towards the end of high school, the college admissions process, it's pretty painful in some ways, but in other ways I thought it was really good for me. Going through the essays, writing the essays, figuring out what you want to do with your life and what makes a big impact. That's kind of led me to Olin. I found Olin. I read some of the founding precepts of Olin. I just kind of really fell in love with the sort of idea behind the school. You figure out it's like that triangle. It's the design, it's the engineering, it's the entrepreneurship / business thing. So it's you figure out what's the problem in the world and how do I solve it? What do I want to see? What change can I make in society? So you design that. Then you sort of engineer, here's the technical solution that can actually execute what I'm trying to achieve, right? And then finally, that's not the only piece. That's where a lot of people stop. We have the engineering, we have the entrepreneurship business aspect. How do I actually bring that to scale in the world? And that to me was amazing. So I was wow, I have to go to this place, this new school. And I think, we were probably all on the panel attracted to this, being part of something new and something from the ground up created. So that's kind of what really brought me to Olin. And then in terms of the business, I was auditing a Babson MBA class. It was a supply chain class in 2013, right before I graduated. Extended Enterprise Management with Marty Anderson. And with that class, that's kind of where I started thinking a lot about supply chains and supply security and resource security. And that's kind of, one day the professor whips out his cell phone. He said, hey, did you know that there's gold inside this phone? And I said, wow, that was amazing. I had taken the circuits classes we all took in freshman year and obviously later as well. So I knew there was copper and tin, but I didn't know there was precious metals like gold, silver, platinum, palladium. So that kind of opened my eyes to it. And a lot of the electronics go to India, so that was sort of something that was also intriguing to me. And so that's kind of how I got interested in the electronics space. And it's grown since then. And we started the company, and we made our first sale 2 months ago, so we're ready to hit the races. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank all of you. This is indeed on. We're going to open up very shortly to questions, so get ready to sort of raise your hand. I see a few tentative hands raised already. I want to just also remark on how amazing it is that we didn't plant any of this, but it's phenomenal the extent to which I think all of you have drawn these connections back to many parts of the college and to each other and to Ben Linder and and to sort of all the things that we celebrate, even on a day like today, coming back and connecting to Olin after you've gone away to help get your Fulbright, right? So it's sort of in the spirit of these connections. I think that's really an amazing thing that's even just showcased by virtue of the 5 of you that are doing these things. So we will open it up for questions, and I want to toss one out just really quickly because I had the benefit of hearing a bit of this in the back. I'd love you to double down on this notion of connections and maybe failing the Olin challenge, Kevin, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm officially joining Nikhil to the Olin challenge situation because when I was talking with my co-founder earlier this week about coming and talking about CapeWorks, Victor goes, oh yeah, like I didn't really interact with Gilda too much, but one of her students, Sharika Banton, was on my senior capstone team. And of course, I had no idea that Sharika was going to be here as the host today. And I show up, and lo and behold, Meg's announcing that her co-host Sharika, and I go, oh, all right, well now I need to send a picture of this to Victor. So it's there really is no escape.
Awesome, thank you. So, any questions? All right, so I can't do both of these at once. I'm gonna give it a shot. So, if the mic, this is a microphone. I'm going to throw it at people gently. So, if you're in and you have a drink, so I'm actually gonna throw it next to you. There you go.
Okay.
Just talking to the X.
Okay. Is it working? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. So I had a question regarding how you guys basically designed different technologies when interacting with different cultures and systems, like whether it be like the Netherlands or India. Of course, I'm sure all of you know, like when you're designing a different solution for a different community, that's not what you're in. No one understands that solution better than the people who are living in it. How are you able to design the most effective like solution that's interacting with different cultures and systems in a way as if you're living in it, and making sure that your technology is basically curated to the different systems that you are basically sourcing your technology for?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I hate to jump on two questions in a row, but this does feel very relevant. So the first and most important thing is humility. I learned so much. There's people whose job it is to work in these contexts, to be in the field, to make these connections full time. And the most valuable time that I spend on the context would be on these 4 10-hour car rides with NGO partners going to field sites, and we're in the car, and I'm just grilling them with, not like grilling them, but just like picking their brain about all of these different questions about the context, trying to learn as much as they can, really pressure test whatever it is that I was thinking about. And if you combine that with a healthy sense of academic rigor, actually doing the reading for yourself, and then some of that first person direct end user interaction, and using those to kind of draw the pieces and help you create your own insights beyond what's just being said there, I think is a really great way to do that. I think the last element is just really not believing you have the right solution to the problem in the first place, and letting the context guide you.
Awesome, thank you. You're itching. Are you itching, James?
I kind of wanted to throw out a contrary view,
Go for it.
which is probably unpopular, but I'll caveat this with having gone out, having done ADE, having gone and worked in other contexts and tried to build things from that, having traveled a fair amount. Some part of me wants to tell anyone who's working on a solution for someone that they see as very different should deeply consider whether they should be working on that at all. In particular, it's very easy to look at someone else's problem and be like, oh, I can fix this, and you come from your own cultural understanding. And even if you spend a lot of time in that new culture, there's a level of pedanticness or saviorism, for lack of a better word, that maybe it's worth taking a step back and saying, what in my own context do I need to examine? And that could come out of a dialogue with other people in terms of understanding yourself. And it does play off your comment on humility, but I want to throw out maybe the zeroth option is don't.
Well, so our Big Belly waste bins are found in 60 countries around the world. So we've shipped product around the world. And I think one of the things that I think about when I hear your question is we are more the same than we are different. I think that's a good thing that pervades a lot of the differences we have in some of the discourse that you'll see on social media and stuff. Is we're all people, we're all the same. So there's a lot of commonality in what people need, and there's some kind of universal truths. But then there's an adaptation to different markets. Our waste bins are a very kind of premium type of waste bin. So we generally find ourselves in premium type of markets. We're not going into some of the same places that Kevin's product is going into. So there's a product market fit that you can take into consideration too, and then kind of try and adapt to the different unique aspects of a specific culture, a specific area after that.
If I could add something, when I was first, can you hear me, guys? When I was first thinking about this electronics recycling, initially I did want to launch the business in India, because a lot of the electronics goes abroad and it's kind of dumped in developing countries, and India is a big origin. So I was able to kind of work with these electronics recyclers, do the kind of polluting processes that they unfortunately do, and learn these sorts of things. But I ultimately decided to first start the business in the U.S. But when we talk about this like product market fit aspects, a lot of my sort of thought initially was how do I figure out who's the target customer? It comes a lot back to the sort of UOCD thing that we're doing at Olin, all the design thinking. Like, who do you figure out, like, what's the customer that really has their hair on fire, that is dying to get what you're trying to produce? So, other future end markets are, all different types of metals, copper, lithium, cobalt, et cetera, for defense and electronics industry. But it seemed the jewelry industry was actually the most excited about getting some sort of ethical, sustainable sourced metal for their products. So that's kind of how I targeted the jewelry industry. And they have these programs called like NSF I-Core. You basically do this customer discovery process. So it's basically like a UOCD on steroids, but compressed into like a month or two. So you'd have like 50 to 100 different user interviews, and that's how you really learn the space and kind of what you're looking for. I'm not sure exactly if this is answering your question, but it's a lot of conversations with different people to learn and understand what are their needs, who really cares the most about what you're looking for, and that's kind of you target towards them, and you work with them to figure out how can your product and your solution meet their needs.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Is that allowed? No? Sure.
Let's pass the mic, if you don't mind.
No worries.
I see some other hands.
So there's a period when you guys were starting that you probably had very little signal about whether what you were doing was going to work, probably before you got any funding or any revenue. And so during that time, what were you thinking, or how did you make it through that chasm of working on your product by yourself or with a small team?
Yeah, can I say something? Yeah, I just think it's a lot like you just gotta have to believe in the mission. And I mean, there's definitely up days and down days. It's a huge roller coaster for sure. And it helps to have others you can talk to. It helps to have others that believe in what you're doing. I find like the network of other, a lot of my closest friends these days are fellow entrepreneurs. So the network of other entrepreneurs, they really understand what you're going through, like no one else really does. And that kind of helps a lot. And yeah, if you believe so much in the mission and the vision, then you keep fighting for it, and then you hope eventually that it pays off in the end.
Eric, I saw a lot of head nodding from your end.
I just completely agree with everything you said. Probably wouldn't be here today without my network of fellow entrepreneurs who make me think that I'm not crazy on a daily basis. I think for me, that the first year was really hard. I was doing this by myself, and that could be a big roller coaster. Was bootstrapping money. Mentors were really critical then. I had a few critical mentors that I checked in with every week, and that kind of kept me grounded through that as well. So having that's important.
Awesome. I'll also say that we'll have time immediately following for all of us to interact and engage, so you can ask your follow-up question. And so sorry. Other questions? All right, so let's go back and then up. Throw it. There we go.
Thank you for a very exciting panel. My name is Ron Bailey. I'm head of African American Studies at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, and a long-standing friend of your new president. I think we count it now in decades. I want to ask you a question because I'm looking at the theme behind your head, engineering for everyone, and thinking about what you've been saying. And it seems to me it's possible to reverse that and talk about everyone for engineering. Because I think reversing that highlights the authentic indigenous experience often gives rise to solutions that people live in and live with. It's not just a question of something that you can develop and market to someone, but it's an approach that might draw out of indigenous people their experience, their ideas, their formulations, their hints. And it seems to me that what you have the potential to do at a place like Olin is to help us engineer a process where more people are figuring out how to draw that kind of potential out from, list any number of problems around the world or in this society, that we need to have a lot more people thinking deeply about, formulating about, theorizing about, to see if we can broaden the possible base of solutions. So that's an idea that I'm asking you to comment on.
I think you've given us an answer. But if anyone would love to comment, that would be wonderful.
I mean, I'll just say I think engineering is a really intimidating field to get into. Probably starting with the college application admission process, highly competitive. You have to have done all these things when you were just a kid to even think about applying to an engineering school. I think the answer to that question kind of starts back then, and we don't do ourselves a disservice, or we think we do ourselves a disservice by making it this really intimidating field to get into, when at the end of the day, it's really, a lot of it's about trying to understand the world around you, which everyone does every day in growing up and playing with things. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to make engineering more inclusive. I mean, the stuff I do every day is not cutting edge, world-leading technology. It's playing and understanding the world, and I feel like a lot of people could do what I do, and it's not unique to my upbringing or my classes that I took or anything like that. But it can be something that's more inclusive. So I wholeheartedly agree.
I can add a little thought and get philosophical here. I think in a lot of industries, there's a desire, there's a gatekeeping that goes on. We who have engineering degrees or who have professional degrees in engineering, or now that I'm transitioning into more finance, who have professional degrees in finance or expertise, a lot of the economic value that they get comes from keeping it a tight-knit circle, who has access to information, who is perceived as allowed to know the things of value. And I think that as folks graduate or participate in the field of engineering, it's a question of how do we participate in that? Are we reinforcing it? Are we saying that you need this to be able to engage? We only listen to engineers because only engineers have the answer, and you only have the answer if you get a higher degree that says you have it? Or do we see it as a set of tools that all humans participate in, and support and shine a light on anyone who participates in using those tools? So I think we should start even in asking the question of it. When you graduate from Olin, now you have this degree, what kind of engineer are you going to be?
I need to get my steps in, so I will take the mic down, and then I'll bring it back up. So I think there was a question down near the front.
Thank you so much. Happen to be the older sister of the president. Just a little shout out. She's sitting next to our brother, who is the entrepreneur in our family, and she's the engineer. So here's the question. My husband and I are both physicians. We chose to do that, and we did it 100,000 years ago, and we were very altruistic in our desire. We are going to bring great medical health to our communities. I am sitting here listening to 5 magnificent engineers who are doing all sorts of different projects, but every single one of them, you are talking about my startup company. I was just curious as to what was the motivation for you guys to go from your engineering, I'm going to develop this, and then I'm going to monetize it. I'm just a little curious as to how each one of you came to those conclusions. Any one of you will be fine.
So I think kind of what I talked about from my perspective, at least, thinking through what I wanted to kind of do with my life in the junior, senior year application process and looking at Olin, to me, it felt like entrepreneurship was the best way to make it forward. You can engineer the solution, but it's always going to be sort of a suck of capital and such unless you can make it sustainable. You have to make it economically sustainable. So if you can provide value to someone and someone's going to pay you for that, and the net value is created for everyone, then you can funnel that into more innovation, to expanding the scope of what you're doing. And so to me, entrepreneurship and business was the way to expand on the technical impact and create that social impact we're all looking for.
I can jump in. I think for me, it was a couple things. One, I worked in a corporate environment for a little while, got frustrated with some of the barriers of getting things done in a corporate environment, and so was interested in starting my own thing. But then also with the question of impact, I think I said earlier in my origin story that I went into engineering because I realized that technology has a huge impact in the world. Today, business has a huge impact on the world, and our climate change needs solutions that'll scale. And so that was really the motivation there, was it seemed like the best place to make an impact.
I'll throw in because my answer to that is fairly something I've reflected on a lot. And we chose the path of doing a venture-based startup. And so when we talk about entrepreneurs and startups, I think we're all meaning, we can mean a bunch of different things. But in venture case, it's like the classic Silicon Valley, go to people who have a lot of money, take that money to try to scale your business as quickly as possible with the idea that you're selling those professional investors on the idea that you are going to grow 10x, 100x, you're going to be $1 billion company. So you're telling a story about them getting a lot of money in return. And that isn't what motivates me. But when you look at the companies who change things really quickly, for better or worse, a lot of them have an unbelievable amount of funding behind them, and that has allowed them to do that change at a really fast pace. And when we were looking, when Zach, my co-founder, and I, were looking at the timelines that anyone was modeling out for making a meaningful difference on climate change, on the climate crisis, and how many lives you could measure small differences in hitting our emission goals made, we decided that it was okay to use the greed that was built into the economic system we have in the US to try to make this change happen more quickly. So it was, in some way, a calculated, maybe even cold-hearted decision, and we know we're walking the knife's edge. I said this before, and it's sharp, and we will bleed, but we hope that there is a path in doing that that is not just replicating the level of economic and access inequality that we have created thus far. That might not be possible, but we are trying to build a company in which we make that outcome a reality, even using the tools that have historically gotten us into this mess. So I'll let you know in 5, 10 years whether we completely failed and I've made a mess of things, or whether we've maybe uncovered a way to be a virus and use the wolf's clothing to dismantle a little bit of what we see.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm now detached from the mic. It's way back there, and then it'll make its way back forward after that.
This might be a good follow-on question for you, James. Well, let me start by saying I'm Ruth Levine. I'm on staff here at Olin, and my role is to build industry partnerships. And I want to mention that Kevin has, before this, was previously worked for Water Technologies and was a wonderful liaison to scope teams the last couple of years. So thanks, Kevin. My question for all of you, but maybe a little bit because Kevin, you're at Greentown Labs, right? Like you're in an incubator space, and James is in finance. I worked in the Cleantech industry as a mechanical engineer a long time ago, early in my career. I moved into academia later, but I feel like the industry that you all are in has just had so many ups and downs in terms of support, and has changes with the winds a little bit in terms of politics. So there was a lot of support when I was working in that field, but then with government changes and political changes, a lot of the industry funding went away. And it feels, when I see Greentown Labs and what's going on there, I feel really hopeful. And I'm just curious, in general, is it more stable now? So that if there's a change in politics and government, do you still see good hope and promise? Because I feel like we're in a pretty precarious position with our environment, and I'm just want to know how hopeful you all are that this is stable and going to keep going and keep being funded and keep making the important progress that we need.
So we talking about stability on fundraising, like funding for the clean tech space?
Well, are you dependent, are the funders able to carry the day if there aren't things like subsidies and all of that at this point?
From our side of things, I think it really depends on the industry. You know, James, you are building something that's kind of based on that fundamental greed that I think will carry across presidential successions and stuff like that, and that's kind of like a fundamental truth about the capitalistic economy. So there's some aspects of it. If you can define a green technology that is valuable in a monetary sense, it probably won't matter what ways political winds are blowing. The way we've seen it on, at least on the Big Belly side, is we do a lot of our sales to government organizations, cities, towns, municipalities, and they get a lot of their green initiative funding from government sources. And that funding largely dried up for a 4-year period not too long ago, and it's starting to come back now. So I think there's a difference between, is there going to be funding for investing in startups, which is probably more likely to be more of a kind of a macro economic, like, is this a good idea? Do I believe I can make a 10x or 100x return on this investment or not? But then when startups like ours develop products, who are we selling it to? And if those sales are dependent on subsidies, green funding, and stuff that may come from the government, may come from external sources other than a personal buying decision on the value, then I think that's where some of that political turmoil and change and stuff can really have a big impact.
Yeah, I can't speak too much on the government side, but I guess if you look at the clean tech sort of investment space, I remember, I got here at Olin in 2009, and for my 4 years here, I was really into clean tech and energy and sustainability and stuff. I remember one of my sort of like mentors while I was at Olin, while he was here was Matt Ritter. So Matt Ritter was really involved in a lot of the energy clean tech space, and he probably was a mentor for at least us. I know that we were about the same year. But I remember him telling me once, like in 2012, that was like kind of when the clean tech, I don't want to use the word bubble, but let's say the clean tech bubble basically burst at that point, and that killed a lot of things. I mean, Coastal Ventures and John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins, I think, were really big into clean tech. I had known one of the co-founders and CTO of A123 Systems out in Waltham, and just seeing everything. It wasn't great at the time. So my perspective, actually, honestly, on the venture investing side and like the capital flows, it's almost like a casino, honestly. It moves with the stock market, with the indexes and such, and like certain things are happening in the political sphere with like geopolitical things with the Russia invasion of Ukraine and things like that. I get the sense almost that a lot of the pillars of finance in our country and globally, they're almost somewhat reactive to kind of what's happening in the immediate term. I think in the long term, regardless, the best businesses are still going to win out, but you definitely have to sort of manage the capital cycle. I moved the business to Florida. I was just recently in Miami for Miami Tech Week. It was an amazing experience. It felt like all of Silicon Valley was there. The kind of people I got to meet, I've never met that side of the industry before. But they talk about how with the collapse in a lot of these growth stocks and such, it's almost, to them, they're seeing, some of them felt it was like the dot-com bubble imploding, and that we're at that point basically. And so within the span of basically 3-4 months of this year, they're talking about how the valuations for some of these companies have fallen like 80%, even when they get financing. So if they do a Series B or a Series C, their valuation is going to be 75% lower or such. So I think it's kind of unfortunate, but I think as entrepreneurs, if we choose to go that sort of venture route, I think we have to sort of manage as well the capital flow cycles and be cognizant of, at some point funding might dry up, and how do we sort of manage the business accordingly. So.
Awesome, thank you. I realize I shouldn't walk the throwable mic around, so I think I'm going to ask you all to let it make its way back this way. I realize that we should probably make an effort to draw this part to a close. We'll let Lee ask his last question, and I think I may have one final query for the group.
I'll do a pretty quick one. So there's kind of a standard question in startup panels where you ask, like, what mistake did you make? What did you learn along the way? So I'll put a twist on that, knowing that all of you have very, very different Olin educations, like between Jeff and James, you might as well have gone to different schools, really. Yeah, so spin on that. What did you wish you had known that maybe you could have learned at Olin, or wish you had learned, or in the future there's a way to teach it, whether that's like in a course or an experience, or maybe you want to disagree with the premise of the question and say it's unlearnable, but whatever your answer is.
I think a lot of it's unlearnable. So a lot of what people think of classes are is learning information, learning knowledge. One of the things I liked most about at least my worst version of the Olin education was learning to deal with ambiguity and unsettledness. That was probably the biggest life lesson that was relevant to starting a company, because that's all you deal with. And I remember the professors were like, sometimes 1 week ahead of us, sometimes a couple days behind us as far as class scheduling and stuff was. And so it made it really unsettled. It was not a streamlined, smooth thing. And we were all used to coming from high school environments where it was, the class has been taught that way for 40 years, and the professors would come in and just knew how to give the lectures, and you had these 7 books you're supposed to read this month. And it kind of had to shake us up and break that. And I feel like one of the best things that happened, at least in our education in Olin, was through those first, certainly the first semester, indeed, it kind of broke us of the mold of what learning and being in a classroom setting was like, and it changed it from just being a sponge of absorbing material and trying to figure stuff out for yourself. And I think as long as the education here is continuing to do that, I'm good with anything that's being taught. What's that?
I think that's a wonderful closing question, so let's just make our way through. James, it's your turn. My turn? Yeah.
Okay. The thing I wish that I learned here that I didn't necessarily, so there is a bias. Olin's awesome. You get to learn how to build things from scratch that you never thought was possible, and that's really empowering experience. But the flip side of that is you think you should build everything from scratch. And in a startup, I think you should not build anything you don't have to build. That you absolutely don't have to build. You should check 10 times over. We talked about a $5 test, but you should, in ADE, which is the cheapest test you can possibly do, is can you do it for cheaper? Can you do it for less? Can you not do this work? And I would encourage anyone who is trying an idea to see how little they can get away with building themselves.
Good point. Nikhil.
So the question I think you're saying is what did we wish we had learned while we were at Olin? So yeah, I frankly think so when I was at Olin, I was pretty focused on the academics and trying to create certain partnerships while I was here. I think the biggest impact is in life, and especially in entrepreneurship, your sort of network, your social network, not even in a professional sense, your friends, your collaborators, your well-wishers, the people that bring you up and can help you. That is it matters so much in life and very much in entrepreneurship. And so I wish I had taken more time to sort of develop deeper levels of friendships with a lot of people here at Olin. I think that's probably one of the most important things, and that it helps you tremendously. If you look at a lot of the success stories, a lot of startups, their teams and their collaboration networks, it comes, a lot of them came from college. So I think to all the current students here, I don't know if some of you are here in the audience, the friends you make here and the bonds and relationships that you have for the lifetime, that's probably the most important thing, honestly, more than the classes, the professors, and everything else.
Unless the professors are also your friends.
Not to insult the professors, by the way.
So I've got 2 halves of these answers. The short up front is, if you want to go to school to get a degree to use engineering to make a positive change in the world, I couldn't think of a better curriculum that you could come up with. Right, the core pillars, which is design, actually listening to people, like just enough engineering in order to understand the core concepts and how to teach yourself what you need to do, and being able to see a business opportunity. Like, that's what Olin's about. That's what Olin does. That's definitely been a huge asset to me. And I'd say that also as a person who got their PhD from MIT, that the technical curriculum here did an incredible job of preparing me to learn on the fly as I did in my graduate level classes at a very challenging program. That said, there's one like small corner of the Olin curriculum that I didn't learn here that I felt could have been really high leverage, which was when we took the course that's now collaborative design, we did a very academic persona understanding and generating process. And transitioning to entrepreneurship, I had the luxury of grad school to like really soak on this problem in grad school funding. But taking that academic process and condensing it down to 1, 2, 3, 4 day, a week tops activity for understanding a problem space, going out, listening, developing personas, and being like really lean and fast about it was not something that I had coming out of Olin. So maybe that could be like a fun, I mean, I didn't take products to markets with you, Lawrence. So maybe you're crushing it.
He was just creating it.
Kevin's done, all right. So
I had Steve and Steve back in the day. So maybe Lawrence is doing a great job of it now, but that's my 2 cents.
Erica, bring it home.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said, especially that the people are probably the most important thing. In terms of classes, I wish I would have taken more entrepreneurship classes. I was really into sustainability and kind of thinking about the bigger picture, but then ended up needing to learn a lot of the entrepreneurship stuff on the job, and I think there's a lot of great opportunities while you're at Olin, so I'd recommend that.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. I will personally thank you all immensely, except for Kevin. And we'll now say we have the next half hour or so where you all are mandatorily sticking around, but we have the opportunity to interact with each other up here in the Milas lobby. And I think concurrently, the OCO, the Olin Conductorless Orchestra, will be playing as well. So please, if you have any additional questions or you just want to engage more deeply with each other and with our amazing alumni panelists, please do so. Thank you.